Welcome back to Gold Derby. I'm Christopher Rosen. I'm so pleased to be joined by Justin Hurwitz, a two-time Oscar winner for La La Land, who reunites once again with Damien Chazelle for the epic new film Babylon. Justin, congratulations on the score. I've been listening to it. It is a massive movie and a massive score. It's like almost 50 tracks, I think, on the soundtrack that's being released. I think I read maybe 2 hours of music in this 3-hour movie. So when you get when Damien's like, this is what I'm thinking for my next thing, and like, I want you to do the music, like, where do you even start to have, how do you even tie your, brain around like what you needed to do for this, basically?
Yeah, it was a little overwhelming, to be honest. When I got the script in fall of 19, and it was like 180 something page script. And it was one of the probably the most entertaining script I've ever read. It was just one insane set piece and just drama and comedy and gags and orgies and just craziness everywhere. And so I was very entertained, but I was also like, holy shit, there's going to be a lot of music in this movie. So the first thing we did was basically just start marking up the script. Damien and we actually met up in person, and we went through and just like marked up all the spots there were music. And a lot of them were very obvious because there's a trumpet player in this movie. So there were going to be performances, but a lot of them weren't obvious, especially the way Damien wanted to use the music, because the music so often goes back and forth between performance, and then it might turn into, we might cut away and it might spill over into a montage, and then we'll be back with the performance. We may start at the party but then cut away to outside the party, but the music is still going. So there was a lot of like play between source and score, and to map that all out and to figure out where it was not so obvious to me based on the script, that really required me to just ask Damien a lot of questions, because the whole movie's in his head. He knows what's everywhere. He knows where the camera will be years before he makes the movie, and I just have to ask a lot of questions at that point.
And then once you get the answers from there, and that's great, how'd you kind of come up with the sound you wanted, specifically? Like, obviously you said there's a horn player in it, so you're going to have that, but the saxophone as well, and like you have a piano at times too. I guess, how'd you come up with like how you wanted this to sound, basically, like with the instruments?
So we started talking about like the philosophy of what it would be, and we knew it would be in the scenes, and then a lot of the music that spilled over into other cues would be basically the instrumentation of a jazz band at the time. But we very, very much did not want it to sound like 20s jazz. It's just so familiar and so quaint. And this movie is the opposite of quaint. It's unhinged. And so we said, well, if we use that instrumentation, more or less, couple of trumpets, couple of saxes, what could we do with it? And one idea we had is to push it more towards rock and roll, to think about the kind of riffs you have in rock and roll that could be played on a really distorted guitar. But if you would give those to horns, very often unison horns, for this real muscular, powerful sort of feel. So we started playing with that. I basically come up with tunes here, and then I start playing with arrangement ideas there. And then the other idea was modern dance music. How could we be influenced by modern dance music? So right off the bat, as soon as I started putting any arrangements together, started thinking about real driving kick drum 808 feels, some like dance hi-hat stuff, which you didn't have back then. You could have, because you had hi-hats, but I don't think you did, but you could have. And like the sort of structure of modern dance music with risers and then bass drops, and then like these moments of anticipation that just explode into these pounding driving sections that get you wanting to move. So rock and roll dance music, but very often transposed onto the instrumentation of a band that would be believable on a bandstand at the time.
So it's awesome to hear you say that, because I was going to ask you this. Like, the movie, like you said, it's completely unhinged. I love it so much. And it reminded me certainly of like movies like Goodfellas and Boogie Nights, these movies that have like incredible soundtracks, right? And they're getting by on these rise and fall stories with these awesome needle drops throughout. And because this movie is set in the 1920s and 1930s, not to besmirch the 1920s bangers, but they're not as recognizable as bangers. And I was like, man, your music acts almost like as a soundtrack at times, right? You know what I mean? Like with like a song soundtrack, right? Like that kind of thing where I'm like, you're creating these incredible melodies and these are great songs that I feel like are acting in the same way that like a Layla would act in Goodfellas or like Sister Christian in Boogie Nights and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it sounds like maybe you did, I guess, did you guys think about it like that or when you're writing music? Because it's like, this feels like not just a score, not that you are ever doing just a score, but it felt like you're kind of like blending the two things together, I guess, from my listening perspective, at least.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of types of music in this score. So there are a lot of cues that are really just traditional score cues that I wrote in that last year of making this movie, where I was just, watching the cut and adding, say maybe we did about an hour of pre-records in 2021, and those became somewhere sometimes very clearly source and sometimes in between source and score. Like I said, we may start as a source, we may start as a performance, and then it spills over into a montage. Then there's about another hour of just, Manny and Nellie's, love cue under their scenes, or some circusy music that scores other parts. So there's definitely that kind of score in this movie. When it comes to the source score sort of thing, it does feel very much like they were pre-existing in the sense of how they were used, in the sense of how they come to the forefront at times to be kind of a score. So like, for example, there's a lot of ambiguity in it. So like there's a scene where we're at the Wallach party, and there's like a performance. It's when there's I think you see a clip. I don't want to give too much away, but I don't think it's not a story point. There's like a dwarf on a dildo shaped pogo stick jumping up and down on the stage. So that gives you a sense of what this movie's like. And there's this piece that it kind of like we're in the room and it explodes, and there's the band on screen, and we have like maybe a minute down in that room, but then we cut away to another room upstairs where something else is happening, and the cue gets kind of quiet. But then at the end of that little vignette upstairs, the cue kind of comes to the forefront, and we mix it kind of like you would, a needle drop in Boogie Nights or something, where it's not like treated like it's coming from the party. It gets loud and it comes to the forefront, and it throws you into the next scene. It throws you into this other room of the house. So then we're in that room. No song for a little bit. It's silent. And then we go outside the party, and we're with Jack, the Brad Pitt character, and his wife, who he's on the outs with. They're on the rocks. They're fighting. And the piece is there, and it's a little quiet. So at that point, you're like, maybe it's coming from within the house. It could be score. It could be coming from within the house. But then they fight. She speeds off in her car, and he's like standing there. And then the cue builds, and da-da, and it kind of delivers you on this sort of look of his. And at that point, it's like, no, that's definitely not coming from within the house anymore. That's mixed like you would do score or a needle drop. So we're constantly playing with how the music is being used and where it's really coming from and what it really is. But the idea is it gives the movie this pulse and this rhythm so that we can land on cuts and land in all these places with music and picture in sync.
It's amazing. I love hearing you talk about it. And also, like, I think it's a testament to your music, your score writing ability, your composing ability, I guess, that it's like you are able to create these incredible themes too that like never heard before watching from the first, when the movie opens. And by the end, I'm like, I know all these themes and I kind of know how they're going to interact. And I'm excited to hear it when it comes back around. Like, again, like you would maybe a needle drop or something where you have a familiarity with the song. So I think that's really great. And you're able to do that in this movie so well. I want to ask you a little about, like, you mentioned like the themes. You have Manny and Nellie have their own theme, like their love theme. I think it's more like maybe a circus. What would you call it? Like an organ, I guess. Like, how did you like come up with their theme for their like romance, I guess?
Yeah. So the tune is the tune that starts with, what gives us that in the case of this, in the case of their theme, it's a bittersweet sort of theme because their love story is very it's not a super happy and straightforward one. But when it comes to the instrumentation of it, we went around and around with ideas, and where we ended up was it's three pianos blended together. It's a kind of pretty Steinway like this, not this one. Every time we have to find a piano, I go to all the piano warehouses in LA and I like to cast the pianos very specifically because that sound of just the pristine 9 foot piano in the scoring stage, it's very beautiful for certain kinds of scores. But for our scores, we want like something usually a little smaller and has a little more character to it. So I went around and I found this very mellow, very, very mellow, beautiful Steinway. And then mixed that with a spinet that had a tack piano spinet, which had been detuned a little bit and tacks in the hammers to give it this twanginess, and the detuning to give it this sourness. And then the third piano was an extremely out of tune, broken upright. So basically, when you mix them together, you get the sweetness from the Steinway, you get the out of tuneness to different degrees from both of these two, the spinet and the upright. And it's the sweet and the sour, and it feels like this sort of broken, circusy sort of thing. Broken, kind of fragile and broken, kind of like their relationship. That was the feeling that it gave us. There are, in the simplest form, it's just those three pianos. There are a few cues in this movie that's just those three pianos blended together. There are other cues where I add a few other more circusy sounds. I did a mellotron with an actual mellotron. We went to the Vintage Synth Museum in Glendale, which is awesome, by the way. It's just like a room full of synths, and you pay for like by the hour. So we just paid for like 1 hour and played these flute samples on a real mellotron, because mellotron obviously was not in the 1920s. It's not even a circus instrument, but when you play the flute samples that way, it gave us kind of a circusy quality. We also used Nathan Barr's studio to record. He's got a real calliope, which is incredible. So we recorded the calliope, which is a circus sound. There are kazoos, party horns, slide whistles in this score, which I recorded here. I got a bag of like kazoos over there, just like playing them, blowing into them, humming into them. Yeah, a bunch of other like little weird things that give us that circusy quality that I think you're referring to.
Yeah, so with their theme, that's amazing. And with their theme too, like then are you, when you blending the three pianos together, basically, is that like a trial and error thing to know that it's going to sound right in the mix? Like how did you kind of like figure out how to make it sound just right?
Yeah, no, it was a major trial and error thing. I mean, starting at the demo stage, I'm working with like the virtual version of each of these pianos. So like working with Piano in Blue, which is my favorite. The music nerds know what I'm talking about. It's a sampled Steinway, and I sampled upright and all that stuff. And I'm working in demo world with like the fake stuff, and it took a lot of trial and error there, just figuring out how to blend them level wise, but also where to put them. And maybe this is too like nerdy to go into, but thinking about, I split the melody and the harmony of these pianos because I wanted to spread them out a little bit, and I didn't want them all to be on top of each other, but I wanted them to be on top of each other in a certain way. So I wanted like the sweet melody to blend with the twangy melody. So I had to put those two, and I wanted like this chord to support that combination, but I didn't want the super out of tune chord supporting that. I wanted that in its own place. So I kind of played around. It took a while to play around with where each of those three pianos, but really it's like 6 elements, melody, harmony, melody, harmony, melody, harmony, where I'd put each one and how they would interact to create that sweet sour blend. And really, if you move one and switch how they're over each other or not over each other, it really did change the feel of how sweet or how sour, how broken or how not broken it felt. So that took a lot of trial and error. And then we went into the studio and brought in some real pianos, and that was kind of a nightmare, to be honest. Some of it worked, a lot of it didn't work. It was a 19-hour recording day. We started at 10 a.m. We finished at 5 a.m. I could go on for an hour about the problems from that session, getting those pianos to work. But it was the sound, I think in the end is I'm really happy with it.
It's awesome. It's real, and like I said, like it's an immediately like, I love this melody, and you hear it throughout the movie, obviously. And it's like, again, like you're doing work. I feel like it's like a great on its own. And then also like, it just is so good in the movie. The other one I want to ask you about was Jack's theme. You have, I'm based on like the names in the soundtrack, I guess like Gold Coast Rhythm, I guess, would you call it? And that comes through a lot, and obviously like follows his character around. And it was interesting. Like I actually, I got to see the movie twice because I wanted to see it a second time. And I was like, I didn't even notice some of the things like, and then listening to your score, I was like, oh, like all of these, this is really following through Jack throughout like a lot of his screen time. And I guess how'd you come up with how that would sound and like why that obviously such a different sound, I think, than the Manny and Nelly theme for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that had to be really sweet and really it has wistful qualities in it still for sure. Plenty of bittersweet in it, but it had to be a lot sweeter because he's a real romantic. Um and it yeah, we use that for him. We use an orchestral version of it on the Hilltop when the album comes out on Friday. It'll be called Gold Coast Sunset.
Yes.
Like it's like the very Wagner inspired version of his tune that takes us through this whole sequence on a hilltop. But yeah, that tune comes back several times and kind of belongs to him. Yeah, I was just thinking again, it all just starts here. I'm left and right are kind of opposite. I'm trying to get my hand on in the frame. Yeah, just kind of coming up with what felt like his I don't know, dreamer sort of romantic side.
It is really romantic. And when I was listening to it before our chat here, I was like, the sunset one is great because I was like, I mean, that scene is awesome. Like you said, it's like on a hill. It's like after a big day of shooting or whatever. And it's just like, that's so romantic. It was like almost making me like get emotional because it's like just so like idealized almost the version of it, right? And it's like really sweet. And like there's so much like bittersweetness to it, I think, too, which is like,
well, that cue is fun because that was like the people will see when they see the movie. It's like we're shooting a movie within a movie kind of, and it's going to be a silent movie. So it's almost like a wink at the kind of classical music that you could imagine set to that kind of silent movie. So it's like using our tune, twisting our tune that we use elsewhere, but making it that like melodramatic orchestral thing that you can imagine in the kind of movie that they're shooting in the movie within the movie.
Right. And we do have to wrap up, but I want to ask you one last thing. And again, no spoilers and stuff, but there's the finale is just it's an incredible piece in the soundtrack and in the score and in the movie. And I guess it seems like that would have taken a lot of work, and the way you kind of blend it seems like it's blending the entire movie and score together in like one track. So I guess how much time did that take? And like, how did you kind of approach that like last bit of music that we hear in the movie?
Okay, so that whole thing, I haven't been sure whether I'm supposed to say this or not, but Damien said it at a Q&A a couple days ago, so I think it's fair game. This was never how the movie was supposed to end. The movie had a completely different ending. It didn't have this whole finale sequence. I think it was like a day before we were supposed to mix this movie. First of all, I was about to miss every deadline with delivering the music. I was about to make everybody so angry at me. We'd been mixing for months, and they were like, the music is going to be on the dub stage, right? And I was like, I'm trying. And they're like, it has to be. Just tell us it's going to be on the dub stage. I'm like, I'm doing my best. And they're like, okay, well, it just has to be. And it was like a day before, and I knew the music wasn't going to be there. We could deliver like parts of Reel 1 or something. And I was like, I'm going to have to tell everybody music's not going to be there. And like, as a sort of Deus Ex Machina, Damien was like, the day before the dub, I think I want to try like a different ending of the movie. So we just like hit the brakes, and it gave us a lot more time to finish the music that we already had. And Damien and Tom Cross spent some time creating a new ending, which is just incredible. Such a big idea, such a big swing, such a really landing the whole theme of part of something bigger, which is where he wanted to end the movie. And people will see when they see the movie. But point is, they started cutting this new ending. We were like, oh, thank God we get to just keep mixing the almost 2 hours of music we had at that point. Probably, well, I don't know how much, but I'm trying to figure adding the finale. When we added the finale, I know it ended up like 2 hours and 2 minutes. So maybe like hour 57 minutes of music we had at that point. So we just kept mixing that. And then they cut this new finale, which needed like 5 more minutes of music. And I needed a lot more time. So basically we went on hiatus. I was committed to concerts. First of all, the movie was supposed to be done at this point. So I committed to concerts in August that people were like, there's no way we're still making this movie in August. So I'm like, okay, I'll say yes to these concerts in Asia. So I went to Korea and Japan and did some concerts, and they just had to like wait for me to get back. And then I had like basically a month to come up with this extra music in the finale, which it brings back basically all of the themes and all the melodies from the movie. So in some sense, it's almost like what I did in La La Land with the epilogue there, but it's a very, very different strategy because that movie kind of went through one after another kind of elegantly, you know, the way this tune would then segue into that tune and they would each get their moment and they would kind of go into each other. This was like intended to be, how do we make a cacophony, like one thing over each other, over each other, over each other. So I, it was trying to be both crafted and an entire mess at the same time. Like that was basically the idea. But to create a mess where it's like it's a certain kind of mess actually is maybe more work than it seems like. So I was drawing a little bit on, you know, the counterpoint, my schooling of like, okay, with Bach, how do you put melodies over each other and how do you have them interact? But I was also trying to have them like collide in certain ways. And like, so if you put them here, this melody here, this melody here, how do they kind of go over each other, but also collide? And there's a lot of like swirling and panning. The melodies are kind of coming in. We have two drum sets. We have Peter Erskine going apeshit on one side. We have Gary Novak going apeshit on the other side, figuring out how they each get their moment, how they interact. We have a lot of improv. We have this incredible sax player, Jacob Sesney, just like wailing, just screaming on saxes. So it took a lot of solo material and chopped it up and put different places. So he's like screaming over here and he's screaming over there and screaming over here. And we have all these tunes popping up in different places. So it's a total cacophony, but it's a very crafted cacophony. And I hope it kind of serves the sequence, which is taking us back through the movie as well as showing us, you know, some history. And it was a wild, I guess your question was how long did it take? It took like I said, we had to pause post-production for like a month so I could make that.
I mean, we have to wrap up. For people watching this, please go listen when the soundtrack comes out. Please go listen to it. It's awesome. And it fits so well in the movie. And it is, like you said, like I'd imagine like making it sound like I guess not to put words in, but like an organized mess, I feel like, or the cacophony is like really incredible because it's all very disciplined and all very much crashing into each other. And I just think it's amazing. So we do have to wrap up. Justin Hurwitz, a two-time Oscar winner, composer for Babylon. Thank you so much for doing this.
Good to talk to you.